Chapter 4. Shadows danced across the wall as I made my way to the main room. A tree branch tapped noisily against the dust-covered pane of a high window. The library was silent, except for the creaking floorboards beneath my sneakers. As I entered the main room, I could hear the steady tick, tick, tick of the wall clock. The lights had all been turned off. I thought I felt something scamper across my shoe. A mouse? I stopped short and glanced down. Just a dust ball clinging to the base of a bookshelf. Whoa, Lucy, I scolded myself. It's just a dusty old library. Nothing to get weird about. Don't let your wild imagination take off and lead you into trouble. Trouble? I still had that strange feeling. A gentle but insistent gnawing at my stomach, a tug at my chest. Something isn't right. Something bad is about to happen. People call them premonitions. It's a good vocabulary word for what I was feeling right then. I found my rollerblades where I had left them, against the wall back in the stacks. I grabbed them up, eager to get out of that dark, creepy place. I headed quickly back toward the entrance, tiptoeing for some reason, but a sound made me stop. I held my breath and listened. It was just a cough. Peering down the narrow aisle, I could see Mr. Mortman hovered over his desk. Well, actually, I could just see part of him, one arm, and some of his face when he leaned to the left. I was still holding my breath. The clock tick, tick, ticked noisily from across the room. Behind his desk, Mr. Mortman's face moved in and out of the blue-purple shadows. The rollerblades suddenly felt heavy. I lowered them silently to the floor. Then my curiosity got the better of me, and I took a few steps toward the front. Mr. Mortman began humming to himself. I didn't recognize the song. The shadows grew deeper as I approached. Peering down the dark aisle, I saw him holding a large glass jar between his pudgy hands. I was close enough to see that he had a pleasant smile on his face. Keeping in the shadows, I moved closer. I like spying on people. It's kind of thrilling, even when they don't do anything very interesting. Just knowing that you're watching them and they don't know they're being watched is exciting. Humming to himself, Mr. Mortman held the jar in front of his chest and started to unscrew the top. "Some juicy flies, my timid friends," he announced in his high-pitched voice. So, the jar was filled with flies. Suddenly, the room grew much darker as clouds rolled over the late afternoon sky. The light from the window dimmed. Gray shadows rolled over Mr. Mortman and his enormous desk, as if blanketing him in darkness. From my hidden perch among the shelves, I watched him prepare to feed his turtles. But wait! Something was wrong. My premonition was coming true. Something weird was happening. As he struggled to unscrew the jar lid, Mr. Mortman's face began to change. His head floated up from his turtleneck and started to expand like a balloon being inflated. I uttered a silent gasp as I saw his tiny eyes poke out of his head. The eyes bulged bigger and bigger until they were as big as doorknobs. The light from the window grew even dimmer. The entire room was cast in heavy shadows. The shadows swung and shifted. I couldn't see well at all. It was like I was watching everything through a dark fog. Mr. Mortman continued to hum, even as his head bobbed and throbbed above his shoulders, and his eyes bulged out as if on stems, poking straight up like insect antennae. And then his mouth began to twist and grow. It opened wide, like a gaping black hole on the enormous bobbing head. Mr. Mortman sang louder, an eerie, frightening sound, more like animal howling than singing. He pulled off the lid of the jar and let it fall into the desk. It clanged loudly as it hit the desk top. I leaned forward, struggling to see. Squinting hard, I saw Mr. Mortman dip his fat hand into the jar. I could hear loud buzzing from the jar. He pulled out a handful of flies. I could see his eyes bulge even wider. I could see the gaping black hole that was his mouth. He held his hand briefly over the turtle cage. I could see the flies, black dots all over his hand, in his palm, on his short, stubby fingers. I thought he was going to lower his hand to the aluminum pan. I thought he was going to feed the turtles, but instead he jammed the flies into his own mouth. I shut my eyes and held my hand over my mouth to keep from puking or screaming. I held my breath, but my heart kept racing. The shadows lurched and jumped. The darkness seemed to float around me. I opened my eyes. He was eating another handful of flies, shoving them into his gaping mouth with his fingers, swallowing them whole. I wanted to shout. I wanted to run. Mr. Mortman, I realized, was a monster.